we introduced Plato last class, and we talked about the Meno, and we discussed this problem of learning and the solution that Socrates proposes there, whereby learning is actually just remembering what you already know, sort of uncovering knowledge that you already have. And remember that we wondered how that's possible. How can it be that we actually always already know anything that we can know? We never come to know anything that we didn't know before. And then we looked at what sort of things Plato thinks can be known, right? And we found that since knowledge is of the real, yeah, and secondly, since what is sort of constantly changing never really is fully what it is, yeah, so it's never fully real, it's always in between being and not being, as Socrates or as Plato puts it, right? It's in the state of becoming, right? It's always in a transition phase. Something that's always in a transition phase never fully is something. It's always in between being one thing and another. And the world that we experience, the material world that is around us, yeah, is according to Plato, permanently in this transition phase. Essentially, is such a transition phase, right? And we saw that, right. This is an insight we can probably assume is drawn from Heraclitus, or it's a very like Heraclitus, right? Who said that everything is change, right? And we recall also the Pythagoreans, who we characterized as sort of believing everything is numbers, right? Who wanted to access the real and, reach a knowledge of the real, and they thought that that lies in mathematics and in the fact of the mathematical structure of the universe, of the cosmos. And that's again because those are the things that are fixed, right? 2 plus 2 is 4, permanently, right? But, the number of apples you have in a basket, right, sort of is in this constant transition, yeah? So it's contingent, as we say, right? Whereas mathematical truths are thought to be necessary, or necessarily true if they're true. So, and behind all this too is the shadow of Parmenides, who is reminding people all the time, right, that what is, and what is not, right? And it's from that, coupled with the observation that everything in our experience is in transition phase, that leads to the conclusion that everything that we experience is not fully real, and so therefore cannot be fully known, right? And we discussed the relation between epistemology and ontology at the end there. That's really what we're talking about. So we need to understand and remember these terms. Epistemology, again, is pertaining to knowledge, and ontology is pertaining to being. And we are left with an idea whereby there are sort of different levels, let's say different epistemological levels, corresponding to different ontological levels. Yeah, that's to say there are different levels by which we can know something, degrees of knowledge we can have of something, let's say, right? We can be absolutely certain of, something. We can have an educated opinion about something, for example. We can have just a belief about something that we've acquired from some source, or we can be taken a wild guess, right? So there are different sort of epistemic, status that the things have with regard to our, our knowledge of them, and they correspond, for Plato, they correspond to or the kind of epistemic status a thing can have corresponds to the kind of being it has, the level of being it has. Some things are absolutely real, other things are very vicariously real or secondarily real, right? And we gave some examples of those. We talked about, for example, having a dream that you're riding a horse, so that the horse in your dream is not as real as the horse that is out there in the field when you wake up, right? And that horse that's out in the field when you wake up is not as real as the reality of what it is to be a horse, right? Because for Plato, the horse in the field is only a horse in as much as it actually meets the criteria of being a horse. And the criteria of what it takes to be a horse doesn't change. It's the particular animal that might change, and when it dies and decomposes, it will no longer be a horse. But what it is to be a horse, that's the true reality of a horse. As abstract as it seems to us to think about it, but for Plato, that is the actual, in terms of horse, the horse, that's the top of the scale, the most real horse of all, right? All right. So this means that we need to talk about now another set of terms, the particular and the universal, and we're going to talk about the ontological status of universals, because that really is the question that is raised here when we ask about whether what it is to be a horse is more real than the individual horse, right? In the same way that the individual horse is more real than the dream horse, or the picture of a horse, or the shadow of a horse, or something like that. But if it is more real, right? Let's say the idea of a horse is more real than the individual horse, then that means that the world we experience is just like a dream or shadow of, right, these actual real, let's say ideal forms is what we'll call them, right? I haven't given him a term yet because I want you to understand what he means before I give you a term. Sometimes if we give you a technical term, you can use the term but not understand what the idea behind the term is. We'll try to do that here, right? So the topic is ontological status of universals. That's to say, what kind of being do universals have? And we have to contrast universals from particulars. So we go back to our good friend the horse, right? If somebody were to say of a number of horses in a field, this horse is the best, then we'd ask, this what, right? And the answer would be, oh, this horse. If we were to ask which horse, then we could reply, this horse, right? So we have two words going on here, the word this and the word horse, right? And the word this specifies which of a number of different horses, right? It particularizes. And the word horse tells you, right, what that particular thing is. So here, horse indicates a universal. Why does horse indicate a universal? Why do we call it a universal? Well, because there can be more than one of them, right? And it indicates one thing that all of them have in common. So we have a large number of horses in the field, right? And we say we have a lot of horses. Which horse do you like best? Someone says this horse. Now we're picking out one among many, right? And the many from among which we're picking that one all have this thing in common, that they're all horses. So therefore, horseness, if you want to put it that way, is universal to them. So horse is a universal. It's one thing of which there can be many, right? But when we say this, that indicates the individual horse, right? Yeah? Of which there can be more than one. Yeah? So in both of them, in a certain sense, are like a one of which there can be more than one, right? But the universal is one that's shared among many, Yeah? And the particular is one that is, its particularity is individual to itself. It's purely one. Right? Okay. All right. The universal is the one thing of which there can be many, as we said. They are the kinds or types of individual things, as you can already probably surmise, right? Because horse is a universal, and cow is a universal, and sheep is a universal, and dog is a universal. And we can just go on listing them, right? There's all kinds of things in the world, but in as much as each kind of thing is a kind or a type, it is a universal, which is a category, let's just say a category that can include many individuals. Okay? Whereas a particular is such that there can absolutely be only one, right? It's an individual, right? Now, I'm not saying, don't get confused. To say that this particular horse is a particular horse doesn't mean that there can only be one horse. No, there can only be one this, yeah? So there can be many horses, but only this horse can be this horse. The particularity is the thisness, so to speak. It's pure individuality, right? All right, now we were discussing about the sensible world around us as opposed to the sort of abstract ideal realm of things which Plato considers to be more real, right? So we'll get to again. But one of the things we got to notice is that the sensible things are particulars, yeah? If I actually see a horse, what I see is this horse, right? A specific, a particular one horse, right? And I know whatever I can observe with my senses. So we're including what I can see, touch, feel, smell, or taste. These are always individual things, and they're spatio-temporally located. They're always in one place at one time, right? So if I got two horses, what makes this horse different from that horse is that this horse is over here now, but that horse is over there now. They're in two different places. Imagine that I got two horses that are twins, so that they are similar in every single way, right? But I have two. If I really do have two that are similar in every single way, then there must be a this one and a that one. And the this one has to be different from the that. And this is only going to be different from that because this is over here now and that one is over there now, right? But since they're twins, I wouldn't be able to distinguish them in any other way. So spatio-temporal boundedness or location is the mark of particularity, and right, that's why they're sensible, because we always observe things in a place at a time, right? Okay. I see this human here now, but before I saw him over there, right? So these are our examples, but you already understand this. That horse was in the stable yesterday. Was, not that one. That was a typographical error. That horse was in the stable yesterday. Right? A statement like that makes sense. Well, yeah, unless only if I remove the typographical error. Let's do that now because that's pretty stupid. Okay, where was I? Let's just, there we go. Da, 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 da. Okay, now, the PowerPoint slide design here is like it's stone and these are etched in stone, but look, good thing that wasn't etched in stone. Good thing we don't etch things in stone because we make mistakes. All right. So a statement like that does make sense, that the horse was in the stable yesterday. Universals are intelligible and not sensible. Okay? Unlike this horse, I don't really observe horse, right? But I think horse. Yeah? Yeah, I understand that horses are all the same kind of animal. But I don't observe the kind, I only observe the number of individuals, right? Okay? And understanding what they are and what kind of thing they are, what they all have in common, is something which I grasp mentally and intellectually. It's not something that I observe, right? So, for lack of a better word, let's call it horseness. That's the right essence of horse, or the form of horse, is, you know, Plato would have it, that all the individual horses have in common. That's not something that I actually see out in the field. Rather, I see the individual horses, but when I understand them, that they are all of the same kind, and understand what they are, the universal is grasped in the mind, right? And if somebody were to ask me, where is horseness? Well, I couldn't really tell you that it's in a specific time or place only. Rather, it doesn't seem to be bound by time or space, right? If we have many different horses, then they are all in different places at the same time, right? And that means that horseness is in many different places at the same time, since horseness has to be somehow in each one of them. Therefore, hoarseness has to be something which is not existing only in a certain time and place, but is beyond time and place, right? And yet somehow is related to each of these spatio-temporally bound particulars. Yeah. So let's take another thing that's really abstract, justice. Yeah. It wouldn't be making sense. It would make sense if someone, let's say Joe is the name of the horse, this horse, a particular horse. Where is Joe the horse? Well, someone could say, oh, well, he can't be in Germany because I am riding him now in France. I'm seeing him in France right in front of me. Yeah, if you see him in France, then at that same time he can't be in Germany. But if we now talk about justice, somebody cannot say, right, there cannot be justice in Germany at the moment because I am seeing it right now in France. Yeah? I don't know. Imagine there's a court case and the guilty person who really was guilty got fairly punished and justice was done, and in Paris somewhere, and the person, maybe the reporter at the event puts in the paper, right, therefore there's no justice in Germany because right now it's in France. That wouldn't make sense. It's not like justice is something that can only be in one place at a time, right? You can have justice in any number of places at one time, right? And that's because justice is not a particular sensible thing. Justice is a universal, not a particular, right? Yet it can be, or it seems to be, that it's manifest in particular situations. Here's an instance where something is just, and in a different situation is just somewhere else. Justice can be realized, right, in many particular instances in different ways, and yet at the same time they're all just, and it's justice in all those cases. Okay. Now, we are talking about universality and particularity, and we need to distinguish this between two other concepts which are different, although they're often confused with universality and particularity. That is generality and specificity. That's why I was particularly careful about trying to be careful about how I use the terms, and I almost accidentally used the term specific for one of the horses in the field, but I actually needed to use the term particular. In philosophy we can sometimes be over picky about terms. Well, over picky in relation to the way we use terms, and we're talking about regular life stuff. But in philosophy, we really want to get to the bottom of things, really get to the truth of things, So we don't want to use terms in a fuzzy way. We want to try to be as clear as possible when we speak. And sometimes we need to sort of specify what we mean by terms so that we can distinguish their very different ideas, right? Sometimes the words are more fuzzy than the ideas, and we need to make sure that the words are as clear as we want our ideas to be, right? So, therefore, we're going to differentiate here. We have already decided, or we have already explained what universal means and what particular means, and now we're going to say that generality and specificity only apply to universals, right? We might think that general is the same as universal, but no. Generality and specificity are two, it's like a spectrum which applies to universals only. Some universals are more general and some are more specific, right? So, I could, for example, talk about Arabian horses instead of horses, and Arabian horses will be more specific than horses in general, right? And that's because Arabian horses are a kind of horse, all of which are a smaller category included in the larger category of horse. They're a kind of horse, right? Specific difference. Yeah, we could talk about unicorns, Rakhshana. And that would, if a unicorn is a kind of horse, yeah. Is a unicorn a kind of horse, or is it a totally different animal? You know, kind of like how a zebra, I guess a zebra's not really a kind of horse, but a unicorn is a kind of horse. Okay, a magical horse. All right, so let's do that then. Unicorns is a kind of horse, so a unicorn is more specific than horse, right? But can there be more than one unicorn? Of course. And so that means that unicorn is also universal, just like a horse is a universal. Yeah, but just that the unicorn is more specific than a horse. That's because every unicorn is a horse, but unfortunately, right, not every horse is a unicorn. Yeah. So, anyway, or maybe that's fortunate because they wouldn't be special, right? If every horse was a unicorn, it wouldn't be that special, right? So, now animal, right, is more general than horse. Yeah. So if I were to say there's an animal in my living room, well, you might ask to me to specify, in which case I'll have to tell you what kind. It's a mammal. Can you be more specific? It's a horse. Can you be more specific? It's a unicorn, right? And, maybe you can be more specific than that. It's a blue unicorn or something like this, right? So basically, how many blue unicorns could there be? Well, even if there are 0 unicorns, because unicorns don't exist, the question here is not about how many there are, but how many it's logically possible for there to be. Okay, Rakshana, let's say they exist, right? But in any case, it's logically possible for there to be. Let's say a unicorn that farts. How about that, Rakshana? Do they exist? Farty unicorns that really stink and use bad language? No, right? We wouldn't. That's bad, right? So let's say that. But is it possible for there to be such a unicorn? Like a farty, bad language, rude unicorn? Yeah. It's like, yeah. So then, yeah, there we go. No such thing exists, but it's logically possible. There's an idea there, and it's a way to specify something, right? God could make such a thing, right? And maybe he just, as a matter of fact, hasn't got around to it yet. So how many could he make? Well, there's no logical limit. There could be more than one. There could be 2. There could be 3. Yeah. How many this farty rude unicorns could there be? There could only be one this farty rude unicorn because there's only one of this. That's the meaning of this. That's particular. So, no matter how specific you get, you can, it's still universal, right? That's the idea. Okay. So, some universals are more general and some are more specific, right? Animal, for example, is a universal. As we said, again, there can be more than one animal in different places at a time, and horse is a universal for the same reason. Well, the example that we gave is more interesting than this, but here's the nice example, right? I'll leave this part in the PowerPoint slides and edit out the audio from what we just said. Okay. So the question about the ontological status of universals is about their existence. do universals exist, or what, right? So, yeah, do they? One way we're asking, do they exist independently of us? If there were no human beings or intellects, right, or beings with minds to sort of categorize things, yeah, would these categories exist still? Do they exist independently of our giving them names, right? So, is there something which all horses have in common, right, which makes them horses, their horseness, that would still be there even if we weren't here to categorize them as horses and give them the name horse, right? This is the classic question of the ontological status of something. Yeah, we ask, philosophers ask about the ontological status of many things, but universals are way up on the list of the really most important things that philosophers ask about in this regard. And when they ask about it, it's usually like this: does the thing exist independently of the mind? Right? Does it exist independently of our thinking of it? Right? Okay. Or are they just ideas that we have? Right? So it could be that they exist independently. Horses are really horses, even if we weren't around and nobody was around to call them that, right? We don't really mean that that's the use the word. What we mean is the idea that the word, represents. Okay? So of course, to say that these universals really exist doesn't mean that there's a word horse that would be there and it would apply even if nobody said the word horse. Obviously, you can say the word horse in many different languages. It's not the words that are important here, but it's the concept or the idea, the reality which, according to the realist here, the word is taken to mean, right? Um, and that could be, on one view, that could be sort of an idea in the nature of things, a category which is in the nature of things, or that category just could be just an idea in our minds that we use those words to mean. Or it might be that there's not even an idea in our minds, but they're just names that we invented for groups of things that we think are similar to one another in ways that are important for us. Mm-hmm. So here are some possible answers. One possible answer to this question, we call it anti-realism, and that answer is that universals are not real. They do not exist independently of human thought or language. Mm-hmm. One way to understand this is called conceptualism, or can be called conceptualism, uh, which is to say that universals are only ideas in our minds. They're just concepts. They exist only in our minds, but not out there in the world independently of our minds. And the other one is called nominalism. Nominal means by name, right? Uh, so the idea here is that universals are only groups that we use, only words, they're just words that we use to categorize particulars into groups. Yeah. The reason why we have two views is because, for similar reasons that a person would be anti-realist about universals, they might have a problem with the notion that there are things such as ideas that exist in our minds, because ideas also fail to meet the standard of reality that many of these philosophers would like to impose, right? Because we can't really see ideas, we can't hear ideas, and the question of like where they don't seem to be material things that you could, examine under a microscope, say. But words we can hear, right? So it seems many people are more comfortable with saying that words exist only, and less comfortable with saying that there are ideas which those words, sort of mean. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we have many different, we have these two different ways, and then within that, many different theories. They're very popular views in modern times because, materialism is a popular ontological framework in modern times. Yeah. So those are anti-realist views. Now we can talk about realist views, views that universals, or at least some universals, are real, that they exist independently of thought and language. Now, a realist doesn't have to think that every kind of universal is real. It may be the case that many universals are just made up. Yeah, it might be the case that all the universals that we understand are actually made up, right? Yeah. Um, as an example, for of one which is completely made up, or we could say socially constructed, right? If we were actually in class instead of all at home, and I was just to go down the rows of the students sitting in class and just go, okay, red team, blue team, red team, blue team. So if I pointed to you and said red team, then you're on the red team. And if I pointed to you and said blue team, then you're on the blue team, right? We now have two groups, right? Red team and blue team. And these are, in the sense that we're discussing here, universals, because there can be many people on red team and there can be many people on blue team. And what all the individuals on red team have in common is that they're on red team, right? They all have that in common. So that's universal to them. However, this is something we just arbitrarily came up with. I wouldn't, nobody would say that you were born red team, or that it's somehow deeply in the nature of your reality in which you are, right? That you are red team. Yeah? No. That's just a social construct. That's not something real. Yeah? Okay. So the realist about universals can completely concede that, and should obviously, that many universals really are just made up things and not real. They don't exist independently of our choice and our continued use of words, right? And our continued sort of behavior. Similar, for example, is like nationality, right? It seems really contingent where a person was born, yeah? And so what passport you have, you know, could be different, yeah? And so we wouldn't say that you're a citizen of this country or that country is a real universal, yeah? It's not as if from eternity, at the creation of the universe, yeah, there were citizens of Qatar and citizens of Egypt and citizens of the U.S. These things aren't in the nature of things. They're just, social constructs. hmm Um, and in between there, we have many other kinds of categories which people, ponder and discuss the degree of reality of those, right? And all this is possible. All this is compatible with realism about universals, because it does seem like, for example, the fact that you're a human being is, in a sense, more independently real than the fact that you're a citizen of a specific country, right? Someone might say. And if so, then there's a difference between these two categories. One is more independently real than the other, yeah? Um, so, right, within realism, then, though, we have different sorts of positions, yeah? Um, One position we can call ultra realism, yeah, and that position is what we associate with Platonism and Plato. And the position is that universals, right, what Plato calls the forms, yeah, exist independently of particulars, but particulars do not exist independently of universals. Particulars are just the shadows of the forms, so to speak. Okay, so when we can use that analogy to, I think, quite a good advantage for us in understanding this, because that's what we have here. Take a tree, you see a tree and the sun is out and the tree casts a shadow, right? Now, we'll say that the existence of the shadow depends on the tree, right? Partly, and it depends on the sunshine too, right? a combination of those, without which the shadow wouldn't exist, right? If one were to ask if the shadow is a real thing, well, in a certain sense, you might want to say no, because if you walk right into the tree, you're going to bump into it, and you're going to hurt your head. But if you walk across the shadow, you're not going to meet any obstacle. Yeah. The shadow is something which you experience or observe as a result of the tree being there. But it's definitely having a lower kind of reality, a dependent reality. It depends on the tree for its reality, right? As well as the sun. So, Plato wants to say that the form of tree, right, which is the concept, the category within which the tree belongs, the idea, let's say, or the intellectual blueprint or essence of a tree, which makes it a tree and which makes it have a common reality with other trees, that is actually more real than the tree, and the tree is like the shadow in relation to this form of the tree. If you want to make it an easy sort of analogy, just think of it like this: that before the cosmos existed, God knows what He's gonna create, right? And He knows that He will create trees. That means that He knows what trees are. So He has a complete idea of what a tree is in His knowledge, right? Independently and prior to the existence of any particular trees. There's like a blueprint for a tree, so to speak. Yeah? And it's completely His idea of how trees are going to be and what's going to make a tree. And for Plato, this form of tree is related to the tree in the same way that the physical tree, in the same way that the shadow of the physical tree is related to that physical tree. So without this form, these physical trees, these individual trees in the world would not exist. However, without the individual trees in the world, the form of the tree would still exist. So it exists independently of the tree. Just like the tree can exist without its shadow. If the sun sets and there's no shadow anymore for the tree to cast, the tree would still be there, right? Without its shadow. And likewise, if the universe is destroyed and all the trees cease to exist, there would still be such a thing as what a tree would be if there was a tree. Yeah? You might think about it as the definition of the possibility of a tree, right? Something like that. Okay, that's ultra-realism or Platonism. Sometimes it's called absolute idealism, because according to this view, what is ultimately real are really these sort of ideas existing independently of any human mind, right? And which are not material at all. Basically, on this theory, ideas aren't just things in your mind. Ideas are actually the real things. And when you think, right, what happens is not that you sort of conjure up an idea just that exists only in your mind. Rather, thinking is more like seeing, right? When you see something, your eye sort of makes contact with something that exists outside and independent of you, right? And when you actually think something, your mind makes contact with something that exists outside of it. It's not just that the idea that it's thinking is only something that you conjured up in your mind, right? Certainly not some chemical that your brain stirred up in itself, yeah? So that's ultra-realism. The other type of realism is associated with Aristotle and his theory or paradigm that we call hylomorphism. Yeah? And we can call it moderate realism, because Aristotle believes that universals exist, but that the universals in particulars exist interdependently. Right? So they're both as real as each other because they depend on each other. Right? If there weren't the form of horse, there wouldn't be any individual horses. according to Aristotle. But on the other side of the coin, right? If there weren't any individual horses, there couldn't be the form of horse. He believes that the two exist interdependently. So it's still a form of realism because he believes that universals are independently real, independent of human minds, right? But they don't exist independently of particulars, right? Uh, Although particulars also don't exist independently of universals. And this is why it's called hylomorphism, because hyl in Greek means matter, and morph means form. So uh, Aristotle believed that every individual thing is a combination of matter and form. Mm-hmm. So I like the term formal materialism because in that sense, Aristotle, he's saying that what exists are individual things. What makes an individual its individual, what gives an individual its individuality is the particular matter it's formed of. Yeah, if I say here's this horse and that horse, this horse is different than that horse, then I'm seeing what's going on there is that the two have the same form, the form of horse, but they have different matter, right? This form of horse is sort of realized in this piece of matter or amount of matter over here, and that hoarseness is realized in this matter over there. So the different materials that they're made out of gives each one its specific or its particularity, its individuality. But the shared form horse, that both of those are formed according to make them both horses. Just like if you take some clay and you divide it into little clumps and then you make some identical statues. You go to New York City and there might be a souvenir shop and there's a bunch of statues of Liberty, little plastic ones you can buy, and they come out of a mold, right? And each one is basically similar in every way to the other, although there are many of them. And what make each one different is that each one is molded from a different chunk of plastic, but the mold is the same, the form is the same. That's a good example here. And the thing couldn't be a thing unless it had a form, right? And it couldn't be a thing unless it had an individuality in a material. So Aristotle is basically taking this view of moderate realism.